Friends, you and I are their heirs, their ancestors. And we're standing up and saying, excuse me, we are announcing a new world without walls, or occupation, or apartheid, or rubber bullets, or tear gas. We are announcing the abolition of war, and poverty, and starvation, and nuclear weapons, and environmental destruction, and so forth and so on. Everybody's going to say you're crazy, but we're going to say, no, a new world is coming, a new world of nonviolence, and that's what Dr. King did. Ninth, the spirituality of resistance, I have to say this, and I don't want to, is a spirituality of the cross. Taking up the cross as nonviolent resistance to empire, of carrying the cross. John Howard Yoder, our ancestor, great scripture scholar, said, 1965 in his famous book, The Politics of Jesus, it's just shocking. The cross is not having a flat tire. Oh, I'm carrying my cross. I have a difficult in-law. I think he said, I have a hangnail, you know, it's my cross. No, he says, the cross is nonviolent resistance to empire. And this is hard, and we don't like to speak about it. When I was with Mrs. King about 30 years ago, and she said to me, Martin says we have to use suffering creatively. Dr. King talked about suffering every day. He said these outrageous things. We will match your capacity to inflict suffering with our capacity to accept suffering, and in the process, we will wear you down because, here's his quote, unearned suffering love is always redemptive. Instead of killing others, we are willing to undergo being killed, to give our lives. Instead of inflicting suffering on others, we accept suffering in the struggle for justice and peace without a trace of the desire to retaliate with further violence. Gandhi defined nonviolence as conscious suffering. A very hard statement in pursuit of truth. We talked about this every day. You all are doing this, and we're called to learn to do this. The gospel says if you're going to resist empire, take up the cross and follow me. Now, here's how I try to figure this out, and I haven't figured it out. But to try to accompany Jesus as he carries the cross in the world. To unite whatever suffering we can go through with Jesus's. And then it's transformed. And so I'm talking about the crucified peoples of the world. And then we're participating in God's disarming redemptive work. And the fall of empire is assured because the Paschal mystery is the path to peace and justice. Finally, a spirituality of resistance is a spirituality of hope and resurrection. Be hopeful. Don't lose heart. Stay hopeful. Cultivate hope. I can tell you this to myself first of all. Which means simply do hopeful things. Get ready for resurrection. Practice resurrection. How do we do this? Thomas Merton, the great monk, gave great advice to a young activist. And he said, do not place your hope in results. This is a very ancient tradition in Hinduism and Buddhism. Do the good because it's good. Do what's right because it's right. Don't place your hope in success, but in the God of peace. The outcome is in better hands than ours, in the hands of God. Instead of worrying about results, we give our lives for justice and peace. Love everyone, resist empire, and place our lives and our work in God's hands, which means we're acknowledging that this is God's work. And we're talking about this in the States, and I don't know if this makes sense, but we're trying to beware of immediate results for success, because that is the language of empire. That's the language of Pentagon. We were very successful today. That's not our sabil. We are servants of the God of peace, doing God's will, letting God achieve the results, even as we give our lives for suffering humanity for God's reign. Our hope is in God. Jesus talks about this, but in a very nonviolent image, over and over. Let your lives bear good fruit. It's beautiful. I find there's an inverse proportionality. The more we're in charge and we're going to do it, the less happens. The more we let God, let go of all of that, and let God do it, and walk forward in faith, in the dark, holding on to one another, in hope, trusting the God of peace, taking risks, the more can happen. Shortly before he died, my friend, the historian Howard Zinn said, every major movement for social change in the United States I think this might be true globally, but he said historically in the US, the abolitionists, suffragists, labor movement, civil rights movement, anti-war movement, every movement, from the beginning, the middle, to near the very end, was hopeless, hopeless, hopeless. I said to him, I find that very consoling. And he said, then there was this breakthrough of hope. Why? I've spent 40 years studying. Why? What happened? And he said, I figured it out. Because in every struggle, ordinary people kept at it and didn't give up. They did small acts for peace and justice, despite the evidence, and those over time, those little things added up to something big. And the one thing that the authorities, the empire fears most is a grassroots movement that won't go away. So our job is not to give up, not to go away, not to give in, not to lose heart, but to keep on pursuing a new world of peace. As you know, in the last 3 months of Dr. King's life, he was entering into deep despair. For the first time, started really talking about hope. And he said, hope is when you have no hope. And he finally defined it about 3 weeks before he died, and I want to end with his conclusion. His definition of hope, he said, is the final refusal to give up. That's us. That's what it means to be a people of resurrection. You know, the Berlin Wall fell, communism fell, Marcos fled, apartheid ended, Mandela was released, became president. 85 nonviolent revolutions in the last 25 years. Mubarak fled. The occupation can end. The weapons and hunger can end. The empire is going to fall. Maybe the real question is, how is it going to fall? Violently or non-violently? We're going to help it fall non-violently. So all I'm trying to say, friends, I thank you for your patience listening to me at this early hour. I got excited. But just to keep your eyes on the risen, non-violent Jesus, to cultivate what gives you hope, to do hopeful things, to lift up that vision of a new world of nonviolence, to go forward today in hope on your sabil, to learn the things that make for peace, to live out your spirituality of nonviolent resistance, and so then to stand up and challenge empire, to be faithful to the God of peace, to become who you already are, the beloved daughters and sons of the God of peace. Thanks for listening. Amen. You've been very nonviolent.
Thank you very much. John is going to ask you to do something just for a minute.
Oh, well, I thought maybe we could just turn to the person next to you, just for a minute. One person. Just say a word or two of thoughts, what you liked or didn't like, where you are, and listen, and then let the other person speak for a minute, and then we'll open up to questions. So for just 1 minute, just turn to one person next to you, say what you thought, and then listen, and then after a minute, let the other person speak. Go ahead.
One-to-one discussions. Can I see the roving mics? I am noting these first two hands here. 1, 2, 3. We'll take 3 questions at a time. 1, 2, 3.
Respond to people who will always bring up the verse that says, I come not to bring peace but a sword, and to divide families, because that's the first thing I'm going to hear when I go back home.
Thank you, Suzanne. Can you give it to the men?
John, your talk was an inspiration to all of us. I've had the privilege of going to all of the Seville conferences so far, and I found a pattern in my life. I come back so enthusiastic, I just cannot stop talking about Seville and Palestine. But as time goes on, it's usually about 8 weeks. I continue to meet so much indifference and apathy, my enthusiasm kind of starts to wane. Could you speak to what we can do to continue that incredible, upbeat, sustenance that the sustainability that you have?
Thank you. Please keep it short. I'm going to cut it. Try very hard to keep it short.
All of our traditions have gifts to give.